This podcast contains spoilers, so listen at your own risk or call back after you've watched the movie.
You know who you call. Leave a message. Maybe they'll call you back. Then again, maybe they won't.
We're having ourselves quite a little game of phone tag here.
Ring. I usually get this guy's answering machine.
I'll call you right back.
If you're there, please pick up the phone. I really want to talk to you.
I check my fucking messages every day when I come home from work. My answering machine, zero. I got a blinking light.
All I have to do is pick up this phone right here, inform the cinema, and your plan's kaput.
No, I ain't got no phone. I had to pull, because people calling all the time, and who needs the aggravation, right? Interruptions.
Hey, man. It's a rainy Friday right now. Just halfway through my work day, just taking a little break. Back at the Wim Wenders pipeline again. Last night I watched Wings of Desire, which we've obviously been watching a lot of Wim Wenders work recently. I watched Wings of Desire the only other time I've seen it about 2 years ago, I want to say, at a guess. I think it was a New Year's resolution I had a few years ago where there's all these movies that are kind of blind spots for me. And you hear about them time and time again. Every time you hear about them, you're like, oh shit, I really need to see that movie. So I think one year my New Year's resolution was like, if I heard the name of a movie, like on a podcast or in conversation with someone that like has been a known blind spot for me for years, I just had to watch that film more or less immediately, like that day or the next day. And I think Wings of Desire came up in that. And I remember very little about the movie. Well, I thought I remembered very little about the movie. Watching it again now, I actually remember quite a lot. There isn't much to remember, really. There's not much that happens in the movie. So it was more that than like forgetting a whole bunch. But I remember I really, really liked it. And I had almost no context of Wim Wenders at that point. I think I'd probably seen Paris, Texas many years previous, and that was it. And I could, would have had hazy memories of that. So it's quite different watching it now. Coming off a couple of months of watching, I guess we watched maybe 5 of his movies, something like that. So yeah, watching this, maybe 6 actually. Watching this one now, with all that context is interesting. Also, this is a stunningly beautiful film, Wings of Desire. And I would love to watch this in the cinema. I think this would be a phenomenal cinema trip. The other time I watched it on my massive big TV. And this time I watched it on laptops because I'm on holidays and I knew you wanted to see it and I knew you wanted to watch it soon. So I was like, I'll watch it. We can talk about it. I can definitely say that watching it on laptop was an inferior experience than watching it on my massive TV. And I suspect that would have been an inferior experience than watching it in the cinema. Because, funnily enough, it's not shot by Robbie Muller, who'd done most of the films that we've seen by Wim Wenders and whose cinematography is brilliant. This is another cinematographer, but yeah, just loads of great shots of Berlin, kind of like a lot of his work. And we often comment on this. It captures a place really well, and it doesn't just go for like the most obviously photogenic locations within that place. It's more just like, actually, really, what does this place look like at that time? So yeah, that was one thing. This was two things that made it different. One, I was watching it wrong, so to speak, in terms of watching it on a laptop. 2, I was watching it not just as here's a random movie that I've heard is good, but I was watching it as here's the next in my Wim Wenders exploration of his catalog. And that's quite a different thing to go in with like almost no preconceptions and then to go in with all of these like opinions about like what his films are like and stuff like that. And we've spoken a lot about how his films have similarities between them, and they certainly do, and this one included. But I think what also has to be said is that like his films are quite different. Even taking the Road movie trilogy, Alice in the Cities, Wrong Move, and Kings of the Road, like those 3 films are very different in like the tone of them Wrong Move being like really academic and sort of theoretical and like verbose in all these like monologues and stuff. Alice in the Cities being like really naturalistic. Kings of the Road like more loose and long, and like obviously it's long, it's a very long movie, but just like I guess it's very gentle and relaxed in its tone, in its kind of like time pressures or whatever. And I struggled with Wrong Move being a bit too academic, a bit less like this is just naturally how people talk when they don't know cameras on them, to like these are mouthpieces for ideas. This film, Wings of Desire, is much less realistic. I don't mean the angel stuff. I'm not including that. I'm saying just in the way people talk, and you know, sometimes it's literally talking with their mouths. Sometimes it's their internal monologue. Probably most of the dialogue in the film is internal monologuing. But you know, it's very poetic. It's quite philosophical. You get certainly moments like with Peter Falk. You get moments of more natural human expression, but a lot of what we hear in terms of words in the film is quite poetic and heightened and you know, image based and stuff like that. So I'm more of a like boots on the ground type guy with Wim Wenders. I prefer his stuff that's super relatable and is not like as like kind of ideas based. So for me, going into this now with all of these like opinions about what I like and what I don't like of Wim Wenders, for a lot of the runtime of the film, I thought I was kind of like missing some of my kicks. You know, I really, really love his movies now, and I would say at this point I'm a big fan of his work, and I'd love to watch more of his films because there's certain things I've gotten from his films that I don't know if there's other directors out there that give me that. So I want to watch more of his films because I want to get more of that stuff. And of course, there's many directors that I could say that about, like Tarantino and stuff that are giving, you know, not remotely like Wim Wenders, but they do a thing, and I want more of that thing. Not to say that reduce these people down to like they do one thing, but some of the things they do, only they do, is what I'm trying to say. So this didn't tick all of my Wim Wenders preferred boxes, but you know, as I often say with his films, there's a friction initially of like, okay, all right, what's the story with this movie? Is this what this movie's going to be like? I don't know if I want this. And then an acceptance, and then a growing admiration, and then you finish the movie, and then you let it marinate in your head, and then over the coming days, you're like, oh, I love that movie. So I don't know why that's a recurring thing for me with him, but I will say that the first half of this movie was more hard for me to connect with in the moment than it is now. Now, looking back on the first half of this movie, I don't really have much of a problem with it. I do like, I guess, the final third where he becomes human or mortal or whatever. It then clicks into more of a sort of Jim Jarmusch, or actually Aki Kaurismäki came to mind, where it's just like watching someone on the ground navigating a city, going here, going there. I just like that. I think he always does that really well. He's great at just showing. I mean, it's hard to articulate it in a way that sounds meaningful, but like even. I just love watching Wim direct someone just walking down a street or walking across a field, or, you know, like buying a cup of coffee or something. I don't know I know quite how he makes that sing so much, but it's the banal stuff like that I think I get the most kicks out of. So when it's a bit more lofty, it's not as engaging for me, but that said, it is really beautiful, and it's also like a great concept, like the idea of watching like this giant library in Berlin, but with all of these angels sat on like you know, balconies and whatever, like banisters and stuff like that. He's created a really rich and beautiful world with this film, and just watching, instead of like some big lore dump or some like title card at the beginning of the movie that like loads it up with like, okay, these are the rules of the world, just gradually kind of developing your own understanding of what an angel's job is, what they do. Well, I guess just watching them interact with all of these lost people at different points along the journey is brilliant. And there's that moment where Bruno Ganz's kind of partner, I mean, I'm not saying it's literally that, but like the other angel that he spent a lot of time with, when he fails to prevent a suicide, and it's just so heartbreaking for him, and it's like, it's terrible. Like, I love that. I love how they seem kind of a little bit passive for most things, but like they're doing their thing, and they obviously deeply care about humans and humanity. And I like that the film lets you make up your own exact definition or rules of like, you know, what these people's roles are or whatever. Yeah, love it. I love that, and I you know, we're never too far away from like just a gorgeous shot. I was watching the film thinking, how long did it take to make this? Because it's you know, I don't know if these two films have ever been compared before, but in the last 24 hours, I've watched this and Flight Risk, the new Mel Gibson directorial movie. And we've talked about Flight Risk and talked about how it's all filmed, it's all in one little boring space. Like, it's the whole film is just in one little room. And how, you know, the appeal of that to a producer, like to a, you know, someone trying with a limited budget. This film is like endless locations that don't have Bruno Ganz in, that don't have anyone. Just, yeah, we're going to see this apartment, then we're going to see this apartment, then we're going to go down this street, then we're going to have this aerial shot of this giant area, and we're going to, like, it's so. It feels like it could have taken a very long time to make. I don't know if it did. I don't know really much about the making of the film. We've got interesting people popping up: Nick Cave, Peter Falk, like just people that, I'm like, okay, all right, this is who it's kind of like Dennis Hopper in The American Friend, where it's like, wow, this is like early to have, well, not early to have Peter Falk, but, you know, early to have Nick Cave, and yeah, it's all interesting stuff. I don't know. I like, there's some of his films that I really love, like Kings of the Road, I think is amazing. Obviously Perfect Days, which is the one that kind of sent us down this road initially. I probably, on this viewing, and again, it was on laptop, it wasn't really the fair way to praise it, but I probably wouldn't put it up that high. But when I watched it a couple of years ago, it really blew me away. So yeah, I don't know. There's probably other things going on in my viewing of it this time, but yeah, had a good time with it. I love Peter Falk, actually. I think I kind of watched the film, it's like, why isn't he in a bunch of Scorsese movies, a bunch of New York movies? Like, he's such a great presence here. And obviously we only know him for one role really on TV. So it just feels like that could have been a bigger career. I love the music throughout it. I think that transition of Bruno Ganz into Immortal, and like the excitement to do, like when he's talking to the other angel and he's like, I'm gonna lie, and I'm gonna, like, he's just so excited about every aspect of the human experience, not just like things that we take for granted, or I guess we are human and we don't think about all of the many things that humans do. I think about this sometimes with my daughter, who's 3 and hasn't done most things, you know, like most things. Like I'll do something with her, like we'll post a letter, and I'll be like, she's never posted a letter before. And then we'll go post a letter, and I'll realize what an incredible, rich and amazing, spellbinding experience it is posting a letter. To me, it's nothing. It's the most banal thing ever. But she's going to pick up this piece of paper that she wrote. She's going to put it through a letterbox, I'll lift her up so she can slot it through herself, which is fun. It goes into a little hole, it disappears. Then I tell her that someone else is going to come along and pick it up, and they're going to put it in a bag, and it's going to go into a car that's going to go on a ship or an airplane, and like eventually it's going to be sat on a breakfast table in Ireland, and like that's amazing. And like being an kind of adult type character that Bruno Ganz is, I mean, it's unclear how long he's been alive for, if you want to call it alive. Like has he been knocking about for thousands of years? They don't really go into that, but just I love that kind of rebirth energy that you get in the end of the film. Now, what I don't like actually is the end monologue by the trapeze artist. The end of Paris, Texas is 2 very long monologues by Natasha Kinski and Harry Dean Stanton, and it's a film that has relied heavily on like incredibly sparse dialogue. Paris, Texas, that is. You get a film that's got like very little dialogue or naturalistic dialogue, like interacting with the kid, and then at the end of the movie you get screenwritery pages long monologue. And that is like, I like the end of Paris, Texas, and I like that scene, and it's engaging, and it's actually really good. I'm a big fan of it, but it's different. It's almost like it felt a bit of a betrayal from the movie. In another way, you could say it's the closure. It's the whole movie is set up to that scene. So I don't really mean it's a betrayal of the movie, but it's very different. This film obviously has lots of poetic dialogue and stuff like that, but that character, the actual human characters in the movie, have been just speaking quite normal, banal stuff up until that point. And especially the trapeze artist, but I really would say all human characters, when they actually speak out loud with their mouth rather than internal monologue. And then to give her this big, long, assertive, like incredibly verbose and very clear-minded and articulate screenwritery type speech at the end, it doesn't work for me really at all. I felt I was much more like, we've left that part of the movie and now we're in the like messy but exhilarating human natural kind of interaction stuff. And so yeah, I was a bit disappointed by that moment, but it happens in this great nightclub, and it's got the scene beforehand where she's on the street with Peter Falk, and there's so much great texture in everything in this film that I can never really hate anything too much in his movies, because it's always like couched in lots of positive elements. But yeah, anyway, I'm curious now to know how you fared with this film. For me, watching it now within the context of these other movies, I felt like it was in some ways quite a departure. I'm definitely interested in watching the sequel. When I learned there was a sequel a few months ago, I was like, what? There's a sequel to Wings of Desire? And then when I got to the end of Wings of Desire this time, I saw the title card, to be continued. And I was like, is that retconning? Like, was that always there? Was that there in 1987 when the film was released? Was that there when I watched it a couple of years ago? Is that just always a part of this movie? Or is it like in the Criterion collection, they put that in there or something? But the fact that this is, much like every major movie that gets released now, it's made deliberately to engineer a franchise and not just like, oh, let's make a sequel because people liked it, is highly, highly surprising. It must be one of the most unique cases of like a deliberate part one in film history, really. But yeah, I'm intrigued to watch that. I know the films before Alice in the Cities are supposed to be kind of lesser, but I want to watch more. There's a few ways that we can go. I think there's a William Hurt movie that comes out after Wings of Desire, maybe. I'm not sure exactly. It might be the one directly after, which I think noticed the runtime of was something like 4 hours, and now I'm like, well, Kings of the Road was good. He held it down for, what was that, 3.5 hours, something like that. I can't remember. It was very long. So yeah, why not, man? A 4 hour, but I think Far Away So Close is the one that's like maybe a bit of an obvious thing. I'm also like just sort of morbidly curious about the watching City of Angels, which I've always avoided. I know when it came out, which I guess was about 98 or so, even then, even like at that age and like not having really much knowledge about Wim Wenders, I think I'd seen Paris, Texas potentially, but I was already conscious of the fact that everyone was saying, yeah, it's a remake of a much better movie. Like, this is not worth watching. There's no reason to watch this because you just watch the better original version. But now that I've seen the original version twice, I think after Far Away So Close, I can see myself at least dipping my toe into City of Angels, maybe watching the first 20 minutes or something, just to see what they did with it. I'm a huge Nicolas Cage fan, and I like Meg Ryan. I haven't seen that much of her, but I think I'll be interested in seeing more. I believe it's from the director of Casper, so yeah, who knows how that goes. And then yeah, there's also a few other Wim Wenders still there that I'm quite interested in. I do think that there's a certain point, maybe after Far Away So Close, that where like the general consensus, if you will, is that he kind of fell off and took him a long time to get back to making good stuff, and it was through documentaries that he kind of remade his name. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we'll feel the same way. So, you know, but for now, I think I'd like to keep it like sort of 70s and 80s, other than Far Away So Close. Anyway, let me know what you think. As I said, it is a departure, so I'm curious to see if you liked it, and if so, how much, and where it falls within his work. And I guess also like what conditions you watched it under, because I think we both said that like you kind of got to watch his films right in a way. You got to be in the right mindset and stuff. So I feel like this is probably a bit of a challenging one if not watched in the right mindset. So yeah, let me know what you thought.
Hey man, great to hear your thoughts on Wings of Desire on your second watch through. To answer your question, under what conditions I watched it under, I certainly watched it under duress of having a really bad cold up since Friday and spent all of Saturday in bed. So what better medicine for my soul than a Wim Wenders joint? And this is a movie I've been looking forward to for a long time, since we saw Perfect Days, or since I saw it first. I remember you mentioned Wings of Desire years ago, saying that I would really like it. So I came into it with high expectations. I came into it with a very positive outlook because of our Wim Wenders marathon, I guess you could call it, or journey. So in many ways, it was the best possible conditions to watch it under, and in many ways, it could have went completely awry. Now, I have to say, I really like this movie. I would put it up there with the best of Wim Wenders movies. And to be fair, for me at this point, there's not a whole lot difference between his best and his not so best. I would say Perfect Days is probably my favorite. This is probably a joint second with Kings of the Road. It's funny, King of the Road has stayed with me longer than any of the movies. It's just a place that I want to go back to. I think out of all these movies, King of the Road is the place I want to hang out with in the most, with its beautiful score and highways and just this whole setting and aesthetic. Now, interesting for Wings of Desire, this is, I think, the first movie we've watched of his set in Germany during a time that we would have been born. So, just on a very point of note, it was really interesting to see what Germany would have looked like in 1987 when I was 2, I think, and just capturing an aesthetic and a place with its depiction of the Berlin Wall that was almost a time machine of a time when I was born. You mentioned that for you this is a departure in many ways to Wim Wenders' work. I would say I am very thankful for the perhaps extra context and knowledge of him as a filmmaker through this marathon that we've done so far, because I found this in many ways very much in keeping with the other movies, and in some ways completely different, but it's still unmistakably Wim Wenders. So first of all, where I would differ from you, which is it was fascinating to hear some of your insight, and you just have to bear with me if my voice gets crackly and I'm not as sharp mentally, just because I'm fucking dying, as I said. So yeah, just to in how I differ and with your interpretations, but that's of course the magic of Wim Wenders movies. So for me, these two angels, one played of course by the brilliant Bruno Ganz, and the other guy, I think his name is Otto Sander. I feel like, let's just say, in many ways I didn't take this literally as two angels, and especially in relation to Wim Wenders' other work. I almost felt like these were stand-ins for the God, I can't remember his name right now. The lead in Alice in the Cities, what's his name? Rüdiger Vogler. The way he always kind of stands in for Wim Wenders, so we think. I feel like these two angels surrounded in a black and white aesthetic that's very interestingly utilized in this movie. I feel like these angels represent the struggle of somebody, perhaps Wim Wenders, just perhaps people in general, of who are almost depressed and have a deep understanding of human nature and humankind, but at the same time struggle completely to connect with anybody and everyone. And again, like I often do when we're talking about Wim Wenders, to take a few leaps of faith, if you will. I feel like this is the mind of a filmmaker, somebody who, as we know, Wim Wenders is very avid photographer. He is very much able to capture the human experience and people's mannerisms and people's actions. But in this, it feels like, much like the two angels that are the central characters in this, They can write people, they can understand people, but they are completely devoid of connection in an emotional way. And I found that really fascinating, especially in relation to the Wim Wenders catalog. We've watched movies so far where there was very little dialogue at times, where there was characters expressing, like you said, in The Wrong Move, expressing stuff in a very academic way. I didn't get it quite to the level of a mouthpiece as you, but again, it's almost open to interpretation about the desires and the wants and the internal thoughts of all these characters in these movies. I find it very interesting that there's a central device in this movie from the very opening moment of the Bruno Ganz character and the Otto Sander character being able to essentially read people's minds and their internal thoughts that are very on the nose, but obviously it's in their mind, so it's not enacted through dialogue, it's enacted through internal monologues, but it allows these angels to, and us as the audience, to gain access to exactly what is on the minds of these characters straight away. We go through people on the street, we go to fathers hearing their sons on drums, we hear wives, we hear the thoughts of people in laundrettes, where we're hearing their literal thoughts and everything they're thinking about in these moments. And that is very uncharacteristic of a Wim Wenders movie. But when you compare it and contrast it with the people being privy to this information and being privy to these characters and being within grasp and being within literal touch of these characters, but not being able to interact with them, not being able to sway them emotionally, not being able to save them from themselves, but having a wealth of knowledge of these individuals, I think that's inherently fucking brilliant. And just the way the colors used in this movie as well to portray that emotion at times. Obviously, movies going from black and white to color is very old. Obviously, Wizard of Oz is one of the more famous ones, but I think one thing this movie does really well is it reversed back to the black and white. So we get this scene where Bruno Ganz meets this trapeze artist or whatever she is. I think the actress's name is Solveig Domartin. She actually learned the trapeze, I read, for 8 weeks for that movie, and she does really well with that. But when he starts to form a fascination and form the beginning of a connection with her, we're immediately greeted with this very short sequence of color before going back again. And perhaps, as the movie's title is at least in English, the wings of desire, the wanting of something, the wanting to put yourself back in the world after being isolated. She awakens that to begin with in him, and for it just to show for a brief moment before entirely going back again is really harrowing. And in a way, a lot of this movie is harrowing when we see the angels in this library, and they're very academic, very much like the Rutger Vogler character in The Wrong Move, where a lot of answers are trying to be found in books, trying to be found in history, trying to be found in science, as we see in the background in one scene, that they're looking for answers in very non-emotional ways. And there's this kind of feeling that humans have looked in the wrong places for connection, and things that's happened will happen again. Like there's this scene where the humans are, the angels are talking about how this place was nothing but streams and grass before, and then came humans, and immediately came the humans where they could laugh for a minute. Then came war, and then came destruction, and there's this almost disdain, very subtle disdain, I would say, for what comes hand in hand with humanity. And just the way the angels describe themselves as very much how a depressed person removed from society would describe themselves, in the way that they talk about that they don't know what it's like to taste something, don't know what it's like to feel a touch of somebody, don't know what it's like to feel the sunlight, taste the coffee. It's very much like how people feel when they're removed from the world. So yeah, I really like that. And again, we have had this in the other Wim Wenders movies, where we have a photographer, we have an artist, we have a writer, we have these characters that are tools for expression. And in this, we, again, in the midst of these angels going around these people, and it's definitely not a coincidence if you watch a lot of Wim Wenders movies, one of these places is a film set. It's crazy. It's a film set that's set very much around the Holocaust and the 1940s in Germany. And what are film sets? Only, well, not film sets, but what are films, as Roger Ebert used to call them, their empathy machines. And I think out of all the places that takes up a big chunk of this movie is this film set with Peter Falk at the center of it. This actor, by the way, I agree with you, he's a fantastic presence in this movie, and he does a fantastic performance. And I just looked up before this, Peter Falk was nominated for 2 Oscars in a supporting role in the 60s. So this guy absolutely nails this, and he nails the dialogue. He maybe nails the most low-key emotional moments of this movie, when he's trying to connect with people who are in that black and white, removed from the world state. He's the one trying to bring them back to earth, if you will. And obviously actors do that through conveying emotion and feeling, and filmmakers do that by also making you feel and depicting scenes. So for me, this is almost the epitome and most refined of the Wim Wenders experience so far. Now, I get what you're saying in terms of we're not seeing people on a road trip. We're not seeing people express stuff through glances without expression. But it's almost like he found a completely different way to articulate what he articulates in his movies. And that brings me as well to the second half of this movie, where Bruno Ganz does decide to come back to the land of the living, so to speak, in a literal sense and a metaphorical sense. And I have to say, Bruno Ganz is fantastic in this as well. Like, if you think about how much of this first part of the movie is made up of the observation of life, and then Bruno Ganz's melancholy expression, almost, that he can't be part of it, and how he longs to be a part of it, and how much of his gaze and his expression fills your head even when he's not on screen, when we're seeing these scenes. It's a fantastic trick by Wim Wenders. It's almost like we are watching these scenes unfold through Bruno Ganz's point of view and through Bruno Ganz's own unrealized pain, really, and or longing, I guess is a better word, a longing for something, to go back to feeling again. And that's just such a great filmmaking trick that works as well as trying to read Rudi Vogler's mind based on his limited expressions. And in the second half, we do get that Wim Wenders kind of magic of seeing this person around Germany. And again, I mentioned, I think, in King of the Road, where there was a lot of things about borders and people being closed off. And again, a lot of this sits at the Berlin Wall. And in fact, when he shows scenes from actual history, he decides to put those in color, meaning they are very much an emotional part of the history and the psyche of the German people at the times when they think about this and when they talk about this. But anyway, when we get Bruno Ganz in color, shall we say, and he decides, I'm going to try and make a go of love. That's what's going to bring me back. That's what's going to get me in touch and get me going again in terms of being a citizen of life, not just overseeing the overlooker, the onlooker. And like Wim Wenders' previous movies, where we get these great shots of the highway, we actually get great shots of behind Bruno Ganz as he's walking on these streets. This great point of view of his shoulders, like somebody's following him, and you get these lovely depictions of the streets. So yeah, all very good stuff to me. And the other thing I'll say is, which made a bit more sense to me than it did to you based on my reading, which again could be completely wrong, is you mentioned the monologue of the actress at the end seemed like out of nowhere compared to what we were used to in the movie. I don't know. I think when we're introduced to her first and when Bruno Ganz is overlooking her, what makes him connected to her is that she's someone in a completely different place that feels isolated to an extent, that has an ever existing amount of freedom, but at the same time is aimless and doesn't know where to go with that. And that's kind of how the angels feel. I feel like they've got an never-ending amount of freedom by not partaking in mankind. And I feel like he recognized the human experience of that in the trapeze artist character. I think her name is Marion. And when they do meet at the end, that's a great scene, of course, with Nick Cave. That's typical Wenders as well, with his music and great sound. when he meets her at the end, when she expresses that monologue to him, that again, we're seeing these characters expressing stuff to themselves. Like every man is an island, every woman is an island with their own internal thoughts. But this is the first time two characters have connected, where one is able to unload everything that's in her mind and everything that she's been thinking to somebody that she has a connection with. So I feel when she spills that to him in the final scene, it's very much on key and on point with the monologues and the ever-ending amount of thought that is going on in people's heads throughout this movie that they don't share with other people, that they feel not being able to find that person to express what they really feel to themselves. I mean, within themselves to somebody else. So I think in a way that scene, even though I'm not the biggest fan of the dialogue that was being used, I still think it's a beautiful scene that these characters have connected and she's able to share what's inside her with him. So yeah, I too would love to see this movie next, the sequel. It is crazy that it ended with to be continued. And yeah, let's get on that. Oh yeah, just one other thought as well. I think again, similar with other Wim Wenders movies, and which again maybe allows me to understand some of his other work. Again, there's often children in Wim Wenders' work, and in this there's a very interesting thread line and theme of children being able to see the angels at times, and how children, again, as you mentioned with your daughter and the human experience, how children are able to see stuff to the fullest of the human experience at times. So I wonder if the children that accompany characters in other movies are very much to signify the loss of innocence in reflection of the characters that they accompany in many ways. And I think this is the first time I've come to that conclusion based on some of Wim Wenders' work. And again, there's this scene where there's this performance, and then soon after we get a kids kind of thing where there's like clowns and very lowbrow stuff, but the kids' enjoyment in that scene is pure enjoyment and very much of the moment in a pure, this is funny, I'm going to laugh for no other reason than it's funny type of way. And again, we get a little bit of that in King of the Road, where they meet up to fix some projection stuff, and then they put on a performance for the kids. There's something to that as well. And again, we find it here.
Hey man, so happy that I'm navigating these films with you, because I think there's been like plenty of times where my understanding of one of these films has been like massively leveled up by discussing it. And I think if I was just working my way through all these films on my own, some would hit, some wouldn't hit. But I think via conversation, they all hit. This one, as I said, I had a much stronger experience with it the first time around, and then this second viewing, it was more of a mixed bag. But all of the stuff that like didn't hit as hard for me, that's all now been like massively changed in my head by your interpretation of it. So that's really interesting. I'll kind of like dive into that as we go. But yeah, really appreciate the insight, and actually genuinely making me want to go back and watch the film again right now, even though I've already seen it twice. So, oh yeah, and also like it's very fortunate that you managed to have this experience with it if you're sick. I know I'm here in Madrid right now, and the last time I was in Madrid, I think it was the last time, I was really sick, probably the most sick I've ever been in my life. And I watched the Mike Flanagan movie, Gerald's Game, which has a lot of like really dark content in it. It's like subjects of child abuse, and it's just a generally very dark movie about someone just kind of like ruminating on their trauma for 2 hours. But watching that sick was genuinely the worst movie viewing experience of my entire life. So the fact that this seems to have been somewhat cathartic for you in your sickness is another accolade we can attribute to Vim. Anyway, just took some notes on what you're saying there in your voice note. It's funny that for both of us, I think Kings of the Road has come away as like the one that we think about the most, the one that stayed with us the most. I probably have a similar ranking as yourself in terms of Perfect Days having a little extra something special. And I really can't think of a director who's had their like universally agreed upon peak period and then decades later made their best film. Now, I don't think many people would call it his best film. I think Paris, Texas and Wings of Desire have that spot kind of officially, so to speak. I think 99% of people, like the consensus would be that those are his best films. But I think for us, Perfect Days, it may be on a sort of beautiful filmmaking level in terms of like cinematography and everything like that. It doesn't reach the highs of his classic work, but because it's so optimistic and just such a, like, I don't know, life-affirming experience, it definitely is in that conversation. Though there's a number of films that I think are pretty damn close. But Kings of the Road, I think both of us were very hesitant to watch it. I think we only watched it because we had watched the other two parts of the road movie trilogy, and we were watching all these Vim movies and kind of felt like, okay, this is the logical next step. We've come this far, let's give it a shot. Purely because of its runtime. I think if it had been a bad movie, and this is how I felt about it, if Kings of the Road had been a bad movie, then it would have been a bad 3.5 hours, not much happening, arty road movie from the 70s. It could have been particularly challenging, but it was not a bad movie. It's a phenomenal movie, and yes, for me as well, it is the one that I want to return to. It's the one that I sort of feel like, as you put it, I want to be back on the road there. It's so evocative and it's so magical. And I love what you said here about Wings of Desire. Almost makes this a sequel to Kings of the Road, and a sequel to the road movie trilogy in general. And in the sense that those films, Kings of the Road is a partnership. Of course, there's a partnership in Alice in the Cities of a sort, and there's a troupe of players in Wrong Move. But Kings of the Road particularly is like two guys of same age. They're both removed from society for one reason or another, and they're looking and observing society from the outside, and struggling to connect with it. And at the end of the movie, not to, spoilers for Kings of the Road, but at the end of the movie, they reach the resolution that they want to re-engage. They've been outsiders, outside observers, removed, it playing another role that isn't really part of society for long enough, and now they want to go back to the land of the living, so to speak. And this film with Bruno Ganz and Otto Sander has a similar kind of like, they're not remotely similar in their personalities, but they're similar, two guys sort of looking from the outside. Bruno he arrives upon that point much earlier in the film. Maybe he's already at that point at the beginning of the film. He doesn't articulate it for a while, but he's ready to dive back in. But instead of the movie ending there, we actually see what happens when he dives back in. In Alice in the Cities, the protagonist feels very disconnected and removed from society, and at the end of the movie, he's feeling like he's been able, via this little girl, he's found a way to bridge that gap. And it feels like he's found his place in the world. And in Wrogmove, it's less literal for me, but it's very much a film about like people who are struggling to reckon with life and reality and the world, try to understand it and shed whatever baggage they have in order to move on and be able to live. So I actually hadn't thought of that connection at all until you said it. And so the first half or 2/3 of Wings of Desires was less resonant for me. But I think if you take it as like this ongoing Wim Wenders sort of struggle to engage with the world as anything other than an outside observer, and even in Perfect Days, decades later, we're still getting someone who's made the decision to step away from the world, and then the events of the film kind of thrust him in amongst the messiness of human existence or life or whatever, and that is it's left quite vague. But by the end of the movie, you feel like that has been very confronting, but also like it's really shook into his core. Anyway, that's a great reading of this film, and it certainly makes it more of a Wim Wenders movie. And yeah, really interesting continuity there to explore from his earlier work. Peter Falk, yeah, I agreed. He's amazing. I only know him from Columbo, but now I look in his IMDb, I see he is in a bunch of movies that I've seen, like The Princess Bride. And now I think, oh yeah, he's the grandfather character, but I just think of him as only Columbo. But when you mentioned that he's got 2 Oscar nominations or wins, I'm not sure, in the 60s, what I've since learned is that he was a important actor for John Cassavetes. Now, Cassavetes is probably in the top 10 most famous film auteurs that I haven't seen any work by. So kind of like Wim Wenders, I had seen a couple of Wim Wenders, but I was overdue this experience that we've had over the recent months where we really explore his work and end up with some sort of a sense of like who he is as a filmmaker. I feel like there's a list of directors that I would love to do that with. And we've done it with a few over the last year or two. But I think Cassavetes would be way up there. So that's a little bonus for me when thinking about the prospect of exploring Cassavetes' catalog, is that I will probably end up seeing some really significant Peter Falk work, because yeah, he's fantastic in this movie. You're right, the film does heavily feature the Berlin Wall. As I've said time and time again with these movies, when it comes to exploring the subjects of divided Germany, of post-World War II Germany, this kind of stuff, I'm a bit all at sea. I can make assumptions on connections to an extent. I can kind of go, right, well, I guess if society is like that, then that would make you feel this way, and that sort of is alluded to in this relationship here. But it's a dimension of the film that's largely lost on me. I know this film, obviously it came out 2 years before the fall of the wall and the reunification of Germany. So it was when this film was made, the like life and existence in East Berlin versus West Berlin was very, very different. And I don't know how different it is today, but I'd imagine it's more or less kind of assimilated everything. It's not much difference. But this film takes place in both East and West Germany. Because obviously the angels can go where they want. But my viewing of this film, and this is just pure ignorance on my part, is really just watching them explore one big city, just as if they were exploring Barcelona or any big city. I'm not at the beginning of each scene going, oh, we're in East Berlin now. So again, I think his films are very, very focused on, oh, I better end this because my phone's about to die. Let me pick this up in a bit. All right, back home, giving my phone a little bit of a charge there. My phone is just absolutely on its last legs. I've never rode a phone into the sunset as emphatically as I have with this one. It feels kind of nice because I'm like, you know, when you buy a phone and you don't really need a phone yet, and you're like, oh, I could use this one for a bit longer, but I'm kind of like, am I just buying it because it's like shiny and new? Like, whenever I do get a new phone, I'm going to have absolutely zero of that environmental angst. I'm just going to be like, yes, I should have bought a new phone 2 years ago, but anyway, now I am. So yeah, what was I talking about? Divided Berlin. The film is just very, very concerned with all that kind of like post-war, and in this case, long post-war, but still post-war, and divided Germany commentary, and it's all just completely lost on me. Close to completely, I would say. So that's just a dimension of his work that I don't really have access to or don't really think about. You talked a bit about the end monologue, and I think this hadn't occurred to me, but you've reappropriated that scene in my head quite a lot. So it's like he has always heard people speaking in this poetic, long-winded, monologue-y kind of way, because he's been listening to their internal monologues, and the internal monologues we have. Not to say that this film is necessarily a realistic depiction of internal monologuing. I mean, I can only testify to my own internal monologue, but the internal monologues we have, I think, for everyone in the world are different to the way we speak. Could be different on a content level, like you could think things internally that you'd never say out loud for fear of, like, you know, being judged or whatever. Or it could just be like the way that you articulate your thoughts, the way that you speak, in quotes, would, you know, logically differ dramatically from how one speaks in out loud in society. And she's sensed this angel, like she sensed Bruno Ganz for a long time, it seems, or, well, I don't know how long this film takes place over, but certainly prior to him becoming mortal, he is the missing jigsaw piece. Like the second they meet, they just like completely embrace and everything like that. They're so magnetically drawn to each other. They are soulmates, I suppose you could say, in the sense that like he immediately feels like she's like the answer to some question internally, and she feels the same way. So it makes sense that then, and I didn't think of this in the moment, but it makes sense that when they connect, she starts speaking her internal monologue, essentially, not literally, but like she takes up that rhetoric. And so that's not all that he's brought to her, I suppose, but we don't see the relationship at all. But, you know, there's something really interesting about that. And I think there's just a lot of depth to this film and a lot to be read into it that I didn't quite latch onto on this viewing. I think maybe I got more of that the last time, funnily enough. But yeah, just another great thing to sort of chew over and attempt to understand in this movie. And the last thing that you touched on was this thing with the kids being able to see the angels. And as you quite rightly said, most of Wim Wenders' work features kids or young people, and this sort of unique and interesting relationships that adults have with kids or young people that they could, like, you know, in Perfect Days, when the teenage girl shows up, like that kind of unlocks a lot within him that no adult would really be capable of unlocking. And, you know, I'm not saying I'm going to tie everything up about how he thinks about kids and stuff with a neat little bow, but it is just really interesting seeing like this great, serious auteur filmmaker. You know, you think about Kubrick and Scorsese and stuff like that, but where one of his main motifs And one of his biggest points of interest is just like a huge reverence for children and the kind of, I don't want to say angelic quality, but there's some sort of like very specific and interesting quality that children have and what they bring to the world and stuff. So yeah, interesting stuff, as always, from Vim. Now I've got to get some of my children ready to get out now, which is always a labor of love. So I will get onto that. But yeah, I don't know if you got anything else to say about this movie, but definitely keen to watch Far Away So Close soon.
Yeah, you're right in the sense that I think this is the first time since we've started watching these Wim Wenders movies that normally the end of his movies, there's a certain point where there's a certain type of optimism about characters returning to the world, to put it simplistically. And this is the first time, to my knowledge, as you said, the second half of this movie is what happens like with the adventures of that character when they do decide to take a stab at reconnecting with the world. So that's pretty unique and great point of interest in this movie. Regarding Peter Falk, it's funny. Apparently they had other people in mind for this, and it was Claire Denis, who I think she works as assistant director. I can't remember her title, but she went on to direct a movie called Bew Travels. That's really heralded. So I think she's the one that suggested Peter Falk, and it's crazy regarding the staying power of Columbo. My partner was watching a little bit of this movie, and she was saying, "Is that Columbo?" And I guarantee you, she's never seen a Columbo movie, or TV show. Apparently, Columbo went from the 1970s right up until 2003 with specials and whatnot. But it just goes to show you how iconic that character is, that somebody who's never really watched Columbo, as I have never really watched Columbo, but he's just instantly recognizable. And he's also instantly recognizable to the characters in this movie. And then to make him an angel, or a fallen angel, so to speak, is a great use of his talent. And yeah, with John Cassavetes. I've not seen a movie of John Cassavetes to my knowledge. That's another trail that I want to follow. And I was just looking at the filmography of Peter Falk this morning, and it looks like he worked with John Cassavetes as an actor. Then John Cassavetes started casting him in a lot of his movies. And there's a little bit of that as well, where he worked on something with is it Elaine May? I think she was an actor in a movie as well with John Cassavetes and Elaine May. And then before you know it, Peter Falk is cast as an actor in an Elaine May movie. So he's certainly an actor that leaves an impact on people when they do come into contact with him, it seems. And apparently he's back for the sequel, which we both want to see next. Can't remember what it's called now. Far Away So Close or something like that. Yeah, so Wim Wenders, he picked some interesting actors. You mentioned Dennis Hopper as well. Apparently he ran into Dennis Hopper in the street in, I think it was Paris or New York, and that's what decided him to cast him as Mr. Ripley. And just a comment about the Berlin Wall in this movie. So apparently you're not allowed to film the Berlin Wall. So Vim actually commissioned people to build a replica of the Berlin Wall for this movie. So in answer to your question earlier of how long did they take to make this movie, it is a very valid question, because you're building a replica wall, and apparently, from what I've read, don't know how true this is, that the contractors made a wall that bad the first time around, that warped because it was made of wood, so they had to do it again. There's a lot of shots of different buildings and very complicated camera sequences almost that you don't really appreciate because of just how fluid and dreamlike they are. So I think one of the things about Wim Wenders as a director, he's just so effortless, isn't he? He's the type of guy that makes you want to make a movie because he just makes it seem so easy, but there's just a skill to that as well, that it's not easy. It's just he makes everything look easy, and for somebody that is so much involved with artistry and artists, a lot of the time you'd be forgiven for almost passively ignoring just how great his directing is in terms of the actual camera work as well. So yeah, very good movie.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say that after having loved so many of his films, I still wouldn't say I'm in a position to really explain to someone why I like Wim Wenders movies. I think watching them, the early ones, as I was trying to get my head around, I kept on using the phrase vibes. But that obviously doesn't give someone anything if they haven't seen the movies. But yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I did notice that Peter Falk is back for Far Away So Close. It's cool that he's like playing himself, but like canonically within this movie, or within these movies, he is an angel. Not the character he's playing, but literally Peter Falk, the actor, is an angel in the Wings of Desire universe. So that's like add that to the sort of like being John Malkovich or Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent kind of thing, of people playing themselves but in very unusual ways. And yeah, I think that for me will probably be the next one that I watch. I'm in Madrid now for the next few days, and I don't really have easy access to a big screen. And I kind of don't want to watch. Wings of Desire was a bit different because I'd already seen it quite recently, but Far Away So Close, being that it will be my first time watching, I kind of want to wait until I get my massive TV back. Although I have heard that at some point, I'd imagine it'll be relatively soon, at some point, like Michael Mann, he starts experimenting with video and digital and stuff like that. And like one of the early vanguard people moving away from celluloid. So I'm anticipating that his films will start to look ugly soon for a while, until digital kind of levels up to the point where it can actually look good at a low budget. So I'm not sure where Far Away So Close fits in that, if it's shot on film or not. But anyway, yeah, happy to still be on the Vim train after all these months.
Your mailbox is full. Please delete new or stored messages which you no longer need so that new messages may be received.